It is 3 in the morning in the North Atlantic. 200 feet below the surface, a ballistic missile submarine moves through absolute darkness in near total silence. The crew has been underwater for weeks. Above them, thousands of feet of freezing ocean. The submarine is carrying enough nuclear warheads to level every major city on the eastern seaboard of the United States. Somewhere on the surface, there are generals. There is a chain of command. There is, presumably, a president. And the assumption that most people make is completely obvious. Surely there has to be a way to reach this boat. Some classified encrypted military channel, some satellite frequency the public has never heard of. There isn't. The water wins. Every time. Most people's instinct here goes to power. If the military can't reach a submarine, the obvious fix is a stronger transmitter. More watts, more gain, a better antenna. That instinct is completely wrong. The problem isn't power, it's physics. Seawater is an electrical conductor. When a conductor meets an electromagnetic wave, it doesn't bounce it back like a mirror, it absorbs it. The signal's energy converts to heat. The wave dies. The higher the frequency, the faster this happens. Standard AM radio, dead within a few feet of the surface. Military satellite communications, which operate in the gigahertz range, they don't even make it to the hull. Even the most powerful military transmitter ever built would achieve nothing against 200 feet of seawater at conventional frequencies. Not because of engineering limitations, because the physics of conductive materials prohibits it at those frequencies. No engineering fix exists. The only variable that changes this is frequency. Lower the frequency enough and the penetration depth increases. This feels backwards. The intuition is that a stronger, faster signal should punch through better, the way a high-pressure hose cuts through resistance better than a trickle. But that's not how electromagnetic waves behave in conductive media. A long, slow wave survives in seawater better than a short, fast one. Which means the only frequencies that can reach a submarine at depth are frequencies so low that their wavelengths aren't measured in centimeters, or in meters, or even in miles. The frequency needed barely oscillates at all, just a handful of times per second, closer to the rhythm of a heartbeat than anything a conventional radio transmitter would recognize. The wavelength needs to stretch across entire continents. The frequency range that actually penetrates seawater at operational depth is called extremely low frequency, or ELF, between 3 and 30 Hz. The United States military settled on 76 Hz. At that frequency, one complete wave cycle stretches approximately 2,500 miles from peak to peak. That is wider than the continental United States. And here is the problem. The lower the frequency, the less information it can carry per second. At 76 Hz, the transmission rate is approximately 1 bit per second. A single character of text, one letter, takes roughly 1 minute to arrive. The total data throughput of the entire system is about 3 characters per minute. That is not slow internet. That is slower than Morse code tapped by an injured sailor in 1943. It is slower than walking to the next room and saying the words out loud. For a system that was supposed to command the most devastating weapons ever built, this is a staggering limitation. But to understand why the United States military built it anyway, the antenna problem must be understood first. To broadcast at ELF frequencies, a conventional antenna doesn't work. Antenna length scales with wavelength, and at 2,500 miles, even a fraction of that demands an antenna enormous by any terrestrial standard. The US military buried 56 miles of primary antenna cable across Michigan and Wisconsin, plus a 28-mile ground return buried nearby, 84 total miles of cable embedded in the bedrock of the upper Midwest. Project ELF, operational from the mid-1980s until 2004. The installation used the conducting properties of the Earth's crust itself as part of the circuit. It was, in the most literal sense, a planetary instrument. Communities near the project fought it for years. Farmers reported fences buzzing with induced electrical current. Local councils passed resolutions of opposition. Congressional inquiries were launched. The military built it anyway because without it, nuclear submarines at depth had no communication link to the surface whatsoever. Here is the twist. After 84 miles of buried cable, millions of watts of power, years of political opposition and construction, what did the ELF system actually transmit to those submerged submarines? Not orders, not targeting data, not the president's voice, not any operational command. 3 characters, a pre-agreed code group, 2 or 3 letters that carried a single meaning. Come to periscope depth and listen for a full transmission. That is the whole message. The most elaborate buried communications infrastructure in Cold War history existed to tell nuclear submarines to go find a better signal, not to issue commands, not to deliver targeting data, simply to confirm the chain of command still exists and it is trying to reach you. This is the behavioral paradox at the center of the whole system, and trained naval officers understood exactly why it was correct. ELF could not carry actual launch orders. At 1 minute per character, a real operational message would take hours. What ELF could do was confirm that the command structure still existed and that it had something to say. The submarine would surface enough to receive a satellite burst transmission, a full data package delivered in seconds, then return to depth. ELF was the knock on the door. The actual orders lived somewhere else. But here is the layer most people miss entirely. A submarine that cannot be reached cannot be recalled. Cold War nuclear doctrine operated on launch on warning. The United States would respond to a detected incoming strike before impact. Ballistic missile submarines were the survivable leg of that deterrent. If land-based missiles were destroyed in a first strike, the submarines remained. They had to be unreachable to enemy targeting, which meant staying at depth. That same property that hid them from a Soviet attack also cut them off from their own command structure. That was not a theoretical concern. On September 26, 1983, a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov sat in front of an early warning system that showed 5 US missiles inbound. He judged, correctly, that it was a malfunction. He did not escalate. But in those minutes, while Soviet command tried to assess the situation, American ballistic missile submarines at depth had no awareness of any of it. And if Soviet command had misread the alarm and launched, and the US had then ordered a stand down from a false positive, the submarines would not have received it. They were beyond reach, not by enemy action, by physics. Project ELF was decommissioned in 2004, not because the problem was solved, because a better workaround had matured. TACAMO, Take Charge and Move Out, is a fleet of E-6 Mercury aircraft, permanently airborne in rotation over the Atlantic and Pacific. Each aircraft flies slow circles for hours at altitude, trailing a wire antenna 5 miles long behind it through the air. At VLF frequencies slightly higher than ELF, that trailing wire can reach submarines at shallower operating depths. Anyone tracking military air traffic and noticing a large aircraft flying long, repetitive circles hundreds of miles from any base, performing no obvious mission, that is almost certainly a TACAMO aircraft on nuclear communications duty. It looks purposeless. It is load-bearing, but the underlying physics did not change. Seawater still absorbs radio waves. A submarine at full operational depth is still electromagnetically isolated from the surface. What changed was the delivery mechanism, from wire in the ground to wire in the sky. The depth problem, the data rate problem, the recall problem, none of these were solved by TACAMO. They were inherited. The fundamental constraint remained exactly as it was in 1960. The full operational picture has one more layer. Ballistic missile submarines don't stay at maximum depth indefinitely waiting for a signal. They perform periodic broadcast checks, ascending enough to receive a satellite data burst, then returning to depth. These checks happen on no fixed schedule. A submarine surfacing at predictable intervals is a submarine that can be targeted. Unpredictability is protection, but unpredictability is also why genuine two-way communication remains nearly impossible. The surface command cannot compel the submarine to listen. The submarine decides when to come up. That is not a bug. It is a deliberate design trade-off. A survivable weapon system was judged more valuable than a fully controllable one. The system was never designed to be perfect. It was designed to survive. Return to that submarine at 0300 hours in the North Atlantic. No message is coming. No signal is reaching the hull. The most powerful weapons in human history are running silent at depth, and the command structure authorized to use them can send at best 3 characters per minute through 84 miles of buried wire, enough to say, "Come up and listen." That transmission takes 3 minutes to arrive. On the receiving end, a crew of more than 100 people continues its patrol, carrying weapons capable of destroying dozens of cities, in an electromagnetic silence that is, in every practical sense, total. The deepest command and control problem in nuclear history was never political. It was electromagnetic. Physics drew a line at the water's surface, and every military system since has worked around that line rather than through it. Which raises one more question. When a submarine does surface, receives a transmission, and decodes what it says, how does the crew know the order is real? How does a submarine commander confirm that a nuclear launch instruction isn't a spoofed signal, a corrupted transmission, or an adversary attempting to manufacture an unauthorized strike? The authentication system standing between a submarine commander and a nuclear weapon is a separate architecture entirely. And the way it actually works is at least as strange as the physics that made it necessary.